On a cold winter night in Scotland, people gather around tables set with simple food and raised glasses. Someone begins to sing a song that feels ancient, familiar, and strangely intimate, even for those who don't know where it comes from. The melody drifts through the room, and the words speak of memory, friendship, and time slipping quietly away. That song is Auld Lang Syne, and the man who gave it to the world was not born into privilege or comfort. He was born into hardship, manual labor, and uncertainty. His name was Robert Burns, and through poetry alone, he became the voice of a nation. Robert Burns was born on January 25, 1759, in Alloway, a small village in Ayrshire, Scotland. He was the eldest of 7 children in a family that lived close to poverty for most of his life. His father, William Burns, was a tenant farmer who struggled constantly with debt, failed leases, and the unforgiving economics of 18th century agriculture. Despite these hardships, William believed deeply in education and moral integrity. He ensured that his children received tutoring at home and access to books, a rare privilege for working-class families of the time. This early exposure to literature, combined with the harsh realities of farm labor, shaped Robert Burns into both a thinker and a realist from a young age. Burns spent much of his childhood working in the fields, performing physically demanding labor that would permanently damage his health. Long hours, poor nutrition, and constant strain weakened his body, but his mind found freedom in language. He read widely, absorbing English literature, Scottish ballads, and classical moral philosophy. Just as importantly, he listened to the spoken language of ordinary people around him. Burns did not see poetry as something distant or refined. He saw it as something living in conversation, humor, love, and anger. From early on, he began writing verses in Scots, the everyday language of rural Scotland, rather than adopting the polished English favored by educated elites. This choice would define his legacy. At a time when Scots was often dismissed as crude or inferior, Burns elevated it into literature. He wrote about farmers, laborers, love affairs, tavern conversations, social hypocrisy, and human dignity with an honesty that resonated deeply with common people. His poems were not abstract or distant. They were direct, emotional, and often humorous. Burns wrote about desire without shame, about poverty without self-pity, and about injustice without apology. As a young man, Burns' life became increasingly complicated. He moved between farms with his family, none of which brought financial stability. He fell in love frequently and intensely, forming relationships that were passionate but often socially scandalous. Several of these relationships resulted in children born outside of marriage, which damaged his reputation in a deeply religious society. These experiences, however, fed directly into his poetry. Burns did not romanticize love as pure or simple. He portrayed it as powerful, painful, joyful, and deeply human. His writing reflected lived experience rather than idealized sentiment. By the mid-1780s, Burns was close to giving up. Farming had failed him, his finances were collapsing, and his social standing was fragile. At one point, he made concrete plans to leave Scotland entirely and emigrate to Jamaica to work as a bookkeeper on a plantation. Before leaving, he decided to publish a small collection of his poems. In 1786, this volume was printed in the town of Kilmarnock. Known today as the Kilmarnock edition, it was modest in size but extraordinary in impact. The book received immediate praise, and Burns suddenly found himself celebrated far beyond his local community. The success of the Kilmarnock edition changed Burns' life overnight. He canceled his plans to leave Scotland and traveled to Edinburgh, where he was welcomed by scholars, critics, and members of high society. He was praised as a natural genius, often referred to as the heaven-taught plowman. Yet this admiration came with limits. Burns was celebrated as a novelty, but rarely treated as an equal. He was invited into salons, but excluded from real power and long-term financial security. Fame brought attention, not stability. During this period, Burns published an expanded edition of his poems and became involved in collecting and preserving traditional Scottish songs. He rewrote, adapted, and refined hundreds of folk songs, ensuring their survival. Many of these songs, including Auld Lang Syne, became part of Scotland's cultural identity and eventually spread worldwide. Burns did not see himself solely as a poet of the page, but as a guardian of living tradition. Politically, Burns lived in a time of upheaval. The American Revolution and the early years of the French Revolution deeply influenced his thinking. He believed in equality, personal dignity, and the moral worth of ordinary people. These views were dangerous in Britain, where revolutionary ideas were increasingly suppressed. To support his family and avoid suspicion, Burns accepted a government position as an excise officer, collecting taxes on goods such as alcohol. Though the job provided stability, it conflicted with his ideals and limited his time for writing. Burns continued to write poems that challenged class hierarchy and moral hypocrisy. One of his most famous works, A Man's a Man for a That, argued that true worth comes from character, not rank or wealth. This belief, expressed plainly and powerfully, would later resonate with reform movements far beyond Scotland. In his final years, Burns's health declined rapidly. Years of hard labor, stress, and illness left him physically exhausted. On July 21, 1796, Robert Burns died in Dumfries at the age of 37. On the day of his funeral, his wife Jean Armour gave birth to their last child. Burns did not live to see the full impact of his work. After his death, his reputation grew steadily. His poems became central to Scottish education and identity. Burns Night, celebrated every January 25th, honors his life with poetry, music, and communal remembrance. His words continue to be sung, quoted, and shared across cultures and generations. Robert Burns proved that poetry does not belong only to the educated or powerful. It belongs to anyone who feels deeply and speaks honestly. Through simple language and profound insight, he gave voice to ordinary lives and universal emotions. More than 2 centuries later, his words still remind us that humanity, dignity, and memory are things worth preserving.